Dawn rises slowly over the silent desert, not as a sudden burst of light but as a gentle, creeping glow that touches the dunes with hesitant fingers. Before the sun itself appears, the sand begins to change color, shifting from deep indigo to soft lavender, from lavender to a faint, powdery gold. For a brief moment, the desert seems frozen in breathless anticipation, as if the world is waiting for something to stir, something ancient and quietly hopeful. The wandering tribe arrives at this hour, their silhouettes stretching long across the slopes of drifting sand. They walk in a loose line, neither hurried nor fully relaxed, their footsteps sinking softly into the warm grains. Every step leaves a transient mark that the morning wind tries to erase almost instantly. It is a strange dance, footprints appearing and disappearing, persistence and impermanence held together for only a moment. The tribe has been traveling for weeks, following faint memory and older stories more than any real map. The desert offers few landmarks, only dunes that rise and fall, patterns shifting with every gust of wind. Still, the elders insisted that somewhere around this region lies a spring, small, humble, easily missed, but powerful enough to support life. Perhaps that was why their pace is slower here. Hope, even when quiet, can change the posture of weary travelers. The first to sense the change is a boy no older than 12. His name, one passed gently down generations, is Taran. He walks slightly ahead, curious by nature, always searching the horizon as if expecting something to greet him. The breeze shifts, bringing with it a coolness that catches his attention. Desert winds are usually warm even in morning, but this one carries a subtle difference, like a whisper of moisture. Not quite a scent, but a possibility. Taran pauses, raising a hand to shield his eyes as the sun's rim finally breaks over the dunes. Its light spreads in slow ripples, touching the smooth curves of sand and revealing faint valleys between them. Something glimmers there, just a tiny flash, almost too quick to be real. He blinks, then takes a step forward. The sand here feels different under his feet, slightly firmer, as if the grains hold together with more weight. He crouches, scooping a handful and letting it fall through his fingers. It is darker than usual, cooler too. He looks back at the approaching tribe, excitement stirring in his chest like a bird's wings. One of the elders arrives beside him soon after. The elder is named Sahir, a man whose years have carved delicate lines around his eyes, making him look permanently reflective. Sahir kneels, pressing a palm into the sand. He closes his eyes for a long moment, listening, not to sound but to memory, to instinct, to the earth. When he opens them again, a small smile touches his lips. "There is water," he murmurs almost reverently. "Not far, the earth is cooler here." The tribe gathers around slowly, not wanting to disturb what feels like a sacred moment. They do not cheer or rush forward. Instead, they stand quietly, feeling the stillness of dawn settle into their bones. The desert is vast and unyielding, yet here, in this small patch of darker sand, it has offered them a gift. As they continue walking, the slope dips gently into a shallow basin. The light strengthens, revealing patches of coarse grass, hardy, dry, but unmistakably alive. A few small bushes huddle close to one another, stubborn survivors clinging to this hidden refuge. The air feels slightly cooler still, as if the desert itself exhales in relief. Then, at the very heart of the basin, they see it. A spring. Tiny, unassuming. A pool no larger than a pair of outstretched arms. But water, clear, steady, shimmering with dawn's first light, is there. It gathers from a thin crack in the ground, trickling out with quiet persistence, forming a pool around its base before seeping into the sand again. The sight steals breath from every person present. Some approach slowly, eyes wide with disbelief. Others remain still, hands pressed together in gratitude. It feels as though they've stumbled upon a miracle, even though stories whispered by their ancestors always suggested its existence. Taran kneels at the edge, dipping his fingers into the cool surface. Ripples spread lightly, reflecting the sky's growing brightness. He watches them with awe, feeling the shock of cool water against the warmth of his skin. After weeks of carrying only enough water to survive, measured sips, cautious rationing, this small pool feels impossibly generous. One by one, the tribe members cup their hands and sip. They drink not greedily but with a kind of reverence. The water tastes faintly metallic, touched by minerals deep beneath the sands, yet it is clean, fresh, almost sweet. Some close their eyes as they drink, savoring not just the taste but the promise it carries. The camels are led forward, their long necks dipping gracefully as they drink. Even they seem calmer, as though sensing that their wandering may finally be nearing an end. After a time, the tribe begins to settle into the basin's quiet embrace. Packs are unfastened, blankets rolled out, and tools laid gently on the ground. The morning grows warmer, sunlight brightening the gold of the dunes, yet here at the spring, a subtle coolness lingers, born from the simple existence of water. Sahir walks the perimeter of the basin, tracing slow circles with deliberate steps. He studies the earth, noting the way reeds grow on one side, how the ground darkens near the pool's edge, how the soil remains moist a few finger depths down. With every observation, his sense of possibility deepens. The desert, though harsh, has pockets where life can root itself. This spring, small as it is, could become the heart of something greater. He crouches near a patch of hardy grass, running his fingers across its blade. It bends but does not break. Even the small things endure, he whispers. His words drift across the air, carried softly to those nearby. The tribe members feel them settle into their thoughts, mingling with their own quiet reflections. Just beyond the basin, dunes rise in gentle waves, flowing toward the horizon like a frozen ocean. Their curves blend into one another with rhythmic continuity, an endless repetition of form and shadow, shape and stillness. The desert is vast and ancient. This single oasis feels like a child cradled within its arms. The morning passes slowly. The tribe rests beneath makeshift cloth shades, eating dates and dried bread. Children splash their hands in the water, laughing softly. Adults sit near the spring and watch the sunlight move across the surface, creating patterns that shift with each passing moment, tiny ripples echoing the patterns of wind over sand. But beneath the peace lies contemplation. They know the desert is not easily tamed. They know the spring may shift, dry, or change with the seasons. They know staying carries risk. Yet for the first time in many weeks, perhaps many years, they feel the stirrings of a vision, a future where they do not need to wander endlessly in search of the next drink, the next shelter, the next refuge. As the sun climbs higher, Sahir gathers the tribe in a loose circle. He speaks slowly, as if matching the desert's natural rhythm. "This oasis is small," he begins, "but so were we when our journey began. We have survived by trusting the land and trusting each other. Here, perhaps we may learn to grow, not just endure." No one answers aloud, yet their silence is filled with agreement, with gratitude, with quiet hope. The breeze shifts again, rustling the sparse bushes. Above them the sky opens wide, an unbroken dome of pale blue stretching endlessly. The sun warms the earth, yet the spring remains cool, steady, patient. It is not merely water, it is the first thread of a story waiting to be woven. And as the tribe sits beside it, letting their thoughts drift like grains of sand carried by wind, they feel something they have not felt in a long time. A sense that they have arrived, not simply at a place on a map, but at the beginning of a future. A beginning shaped by dawn light, soft sand, and a single, life-giving spring nestled quietly in the heart of the desert. The first day at the spring passed gently, like a long exhale after years of holding one's breath. But it was during the evening, as the sun slid beyond the dunes and the quiet blue of twilight softened the edges of the world, that the real beginning took shape. It started not with a declaration or a building, but with the simple raising of tents, shapes of fabric and rope that whisper to the desert, "We are here, if you will have us." The tribe gathered in the basin's shallow cradle, where the ground was firmer and the winds, though still persistent, passed more softly. Here, the sand was not the loose, shifting kind found on the open slopes, but a mix of grain and compacted earth, a sign that life had once lingered here before them. The first tent belonged to Sahir, the elder, though he unfurled it with no sense of priority. He knelt on the cooling ground, smoothing the fabric with slow, careful motions. The cloth was a faded brown, worn by sun and sand, smelling faintly of smoke from countless past camps. As he spread it out, small puffs of dust rose into the air, catching the fading light. That dust carried memories, nights under distant constellations, storms weathered, and countless sleeps where survival was never guaranteed. Nearby, others began to do the same. Some laid woven mats first, pressing them into the sand to create flat, comfortable surfaces. Others hammered wooden pegs into the ground with stones, each strike echoing gently across the basin. The rhythm of this labor, repeated by many hands, felt like the heartbeat of a community slowly finding form. Children helped in their own way, gathering reeds from near the spring's edge. The reeds crackled softly in their small hands, their tips still damp with the day's moisture. These would be used to weave windbreaks or strengthen shade covers. The children whispered among themselves, voices hushed as though afraid to disturb the oasis. They moved with a kind of excited caution, as if aware that something sacred was unfolding around them. As the tents rose, their pointed tops and gently sloping sides resembled dunes in miniature, blending naturally into the landscape. Ropes stretched outward, anchored with stones. The fabric fluttered softly, carrying the scent of wool and dried herbs. In the dimming light, each tent glowed faintly from within as lanterns were lit, turning the settlement into a constellation of warm, earthbound stars. Once their shelters stood, the tribe turned to the next act of settlement: fire. There is something ancient in fire making, something that connects people across thousands of years. Even here, in a place untouched by human hands for generations, the spark of flame felt like a small anchor against the vastness of night. A man named Rafi, known for his steady hands, knelt beside a small pile of kindling arranged carefully in a shallow pit. Thin branches collected from the sparse bushes lay over dried grass and shavings cut earlier from camel packs. The air around him was still, expectant. He pressed a smooth wooden spindle into a carved base, bowing the stick between a taut bowstring. Then, with slow, practiced strokes, he worked the bow back and forth. The spindle turned, the friction deepened, thin wisps of smoke curled upward. People watched, not with urgency but with quiet patience. Fire was not a luxury but a ritual, one they had repeated countless times. Still, the first fire of a new home always carried a special weight, an unspoken hope that it would burn not just for one night but for many seasons to come. A tiny ember formed. Rafi lifted it gently onto a nest of grass and reed fibers, cupping his hands around it. He breathed slowly, coaxing it to life. The ember brightened, then flared. Flames licked upward, timid at first, then stronger as he fed them thin sticks and small branches. Soon other fires followed. Circles of warm light bloomed across the growing settlement, pushing back the desert's deepening darkness. Each fire had its own personality. Some crackled energetically, others burned slow and steady, sending up thin blue threads of smoke that drifted lazily across the basin. The smell of smoke mingled with the scent of the desert night, cool air tinged with distant sand, faint sweetness from the sparse plants around the spring, and the earthy aroma that rises when heat leaves the land. Above them, the sky transformed into a sweeping tapestry of stars, each one glittering with almost painful clarity. In the desert, the stars seemed closer, as if they leaned down to watch humanity's small fires flicker in the dark. Families gathered around the flames, warming their hands, steaming water in small clay pots, and sharing dried fruit softened with fresh spring water. The sound of water ladled into cups echoed lightly, an unfamiliar luxury after so many days of rationing. The tribe drank slowly, letting the cool liquid spread warmth through their chests. Beside one of the fires, Taryn sat with his knees drawn up, gazing at the pool shimmering in moonlight. It looked smaller now, surrounded by tents and lantern glow, but no less miraculous. He wondered how many stories the spring had witnessed before them. Perhaps other travelers had rested here centuries ago, leaving behind footprints long since swallowed by the shifting sands. Perhaps animals came at night to drink in silence. The spring felt alive, not just as water but as presence, as memory. Across the basin, older women spread reeds out to dry, their hands moving slowly and methodically. They spoke in low tones about weaving mats and baskets in the coming days, considering the patterns they might use. Their conversation flowed gently, looping back on familiar topics like the quality of reeds this season or how dew might gather on the fibers by morning. The repetitive nature of their talk, soft and soothing, blended seamlessly with the night's calm. Sahir walked among the fires, observing quietly. His staff left faint impressions in the sand with each deliberate step. He nodded to families as he passed, not interrupting their conversations but acknowledging their presence. When he reached the edge of the spring, he paused, letting the night settle over him like a cloak. The water reflected the moon's light, turning its surface silver and opaline. Tiny movements, ripples from a drifting breeze, caught Sahir's attention. He found comfort in them. They were gentle reminders that even stillness contains motion, that life continues in the smallest details. He knelt beside the pool and dipped a hand into the water. The coolness surprised him, reminding him again of the oasis's quiet generosity. He let droplets slide through his fingers, each one glinting in moonlight before disappearing into the sand. Behind him, the settlement murmured with soft laughter, light conversation, and the occasional crackle from a sputtering fire. It was a humble sound, a first breath of community forming. He thought of the journey that had brought them here, the harsh winds, the endless dunes, the nights when fear crept into their bellies like cold. Yet all of that had led to this place, where tents rose like small mountains and fires burned with warmth instead of desperation. The contrast felt profound. Slowly, he folded his hands in his lap and allowed himself a moment of stillness, a moment to simply exist beside the water. He felt the sand beneath him cooling with the night, heard the soft rustling of fabric as tents shifted in the breeze, and sensed the quiet heartbeat of the community he had shepherded through the desert. Above, the stars continued their slow dance, unwavering and unhurried. As the night deepened, a calm settled over the settlement. Conversations dwindled. Fires burned lower, becoming pools of glowing embers. The desert night wrapped the oasis in its vast silence, broken only by the faint whisper of wind sweeping across the dunes. Inside the tents, families lay on woven mats, their breathing soft and steady. Some stayed awake a little longer, listening to the distant rustle of reed leaves or watching lantern shadows dance across the cloth walls. They thought of tomorrow, of gathering more reeds, strengthening the tents, exploring the land around the spring. But those thoughts drifted gently, unhurried like sand carried on a light breeze. And at the heart of the settlement, the spring flowed quietly, feeding the earth in slow, patient trickles. Its presence was steady, constant, as if promising that life could indeed take root here. In that promise, under the quiet watch of the moon and stars, the settlement truly began. Morning came softly to the newborn settlement. Before the sun had fully climbed above the dunes, the air already carried a subtle warmth, like the breath of a waking giant stretching across the horizon. Sand grains glimmered faintly, catching early light and scattering it in gentle shimmers across the basin. For the first time in generations, the tribe greeted this dawn not as travelers preparing to march, but as inhabitants of a place that might someday be called home. The spring, with its steady trickle of water, had become their quiet center. People gathered around it instinctively as they began their day, much like birds drawn to a pool at first light. Children splashed their hands in its shallows, delighting in the coolness that felt almost magical in the desert heat. Adults cupped water to wash their faces, allowing droplets to cling to their skin before evaporating slowly into the warming air. Sahir watched them with a calm, reflective gaze. His heart felt unexpectedly full, not with pride or excitement but with a softer emotion, something like gratitude. The desert had given them a starting point. Now it was their task to treat this place gently, to learn its rhythms, to understand its limits. The first priority that morning was clear. They needed a well. Though the spring flowed steadily, it was small, too small to sustain a future village if used carelessly. A well would allow them to collect the underground water that fed the spring, drawing from deeper reserves and easing pressure on the surface pool. Raffi, whose hands were both strong and precise, led the effort. He gathered a few of the younger men and older boys, including Taryn, who approached with eager steps. Tools were limited, mostly wooden shafts tipped with sharpened stones, but with patience, even hard earth could be persuaded to yield. They chose a spot near the spring but not directly beside it, leaving room for reeds and small plants to grow. Sahir traced a circle in the sand with his staff, marking where the digging would begin. The circle was small at first, barely wide enough for two people, but he explained that wells were widened slowly, like coaxing a shy animal out of hiding. "Do not rush," he told them. "The desert rewards care, not force." The digging began with steady, rhythmic motions. Raffi drove the stone-tipped tool into the earth, lifting out small shovelfuls of sand and compact soil. Taryn followed behind him, gathering the debris into baskets made from woven reeds and carrying them away to dump farther up the slope. The sound of their work, thud, scrape, lift, pour, became a gentle drumbeat echoing through the morning. Their breaths formed a second rhythm, deeper and slower as the sun climbed. Sweat glistened on their foreheads, drying quickly in the dry air. Every so often they paused, not out of exhaustion but to simply feel the earth, to sense whether their placement was right. Sahir would kneel at the edge of the pit, pressing his palm into the soil, closing his eyes as though the ground might speak to him. When the soil began to grow slightly cooler a few feet down, he smiled. "We are near the breath of the water," he murmured. While the men worked, others tended to another essential task, gardens. To most people, gardens might seem ordinary, but in the desert, gardens are nothing less than defiance and devotion intertwined. They are promises whispered to the land, asking life to stay a little longer. The women, joined by several of the teenagers and elders, began clearing small plots of earth a short distance from the spring. Their movements were gentle, almost tender, as though they feared harming the soil. They removed stones with slow, deliberate motions and loosened the top layers of sand to reveal firmer ground beneath. They had brought seeds with them, stored carefully during their years of wandering. Some were grains that could survive harsh climates. Others were herbs passed from mother to daughter, believed to bring strength or healing. The seeds seemed impossibly small, fragile things, yet within them lay the memory of entire harvests. The women mixed spring water with sand to create a moist, pliable soil mixture. When the water touched the dry earth, a deep, rich scent rose, a smell of life, potential, and ancient memory. It was a scent many had forgotten during their years of wandering. Some closed their eyes just to breathe it in a little longer. They worked in quiet companionship, smoothing the soil, shaping the garden plots into soft, rounded mounds. A few placed small stones around the edges, creating circles that felt both practical and ceremonial. In the desert, even the smallest boundaries mattered. When it came time to plant, they did so slowly. Each seed was pressed gently beneath the surface, covered with a thin layer of soil. Each planting came with a silent thought, gratitude, hope, remembrance. These gardens were not just attempts to grow food, they were acts of connection, rooting themselves into the land after a lifetime of drifting. Meanwhile, the digging of the well continued with increasing depth. The sun reached its zenith, casting short shadows and bathing the basin in shimmering heat. By then, the pit was nearly chest deep, and the air inside it felt noticeably cooler. Raffi paused, wiping dust from his face. He tapped the earth again with the digging tool, and for the first time, the soil responded differently. It crumbled with a damp heaviness. Taryn leaned closer, breath catching in his throat. Is that? Raffi nodded. Moist earth, water is near. Excitement rippled through the group, but they remained steady, careful. As the pit deepened another few inches, a dark patch began to expand. Then slowly, so slowly it felt like a held breath finally released, tiny beads of water gathered between grains of soil. They gleamed like sparks of silver in the muted light. Water seeped inward, forming a soft puddle at the bottom. Taryn gasped softly, "We found it." Raffi placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, grounding him. "The water found us," he corrected gently. The others gathered around, their expressions filled with quiet satisfaction. There was no cheering, no loud celebration. Instead, the moment held a deep, steady joy, the kind that sinks into the bones and stays there, quiet and enduring. They lined the edges of the well with stones brought from nearby dunes, fitting each piece carefully to prevent collapse. The stones warmed under the sun, their surfaces rough and familiar under their hands. Piece by piece, the well took shape, not large or grand but functional, sturdy, and thoughtfully made. As afternoon softened toward dusk, the tribe gathered around the completed well. Its small pool at the bottom reflected the sky in miniature. The water was clear enough to see individual stones, yet deep enough to cup in one's hands. The spring nearby still flowed, but now its burden felt shared. Sahir approached the well last. He leaned on his staff, gazing down at the water with eyes softened by both pride and humility. After a long, reflective silence, he dipped his hand into the cool water and let it pool in his palm before falling back. "This," he said quietly, "is the first root of our home." As the sun lowered, turning the sky orange and rose, the new gardens cast long shadows across the sand. Their small mounds of carefully shaped soil glowed warmly. The air carried the faint scent of clay pots heating over fires, mingling with the aroma of early seedlings beginning to breathe beneath the earth. Later, as the tribe ate a simple meal, flatbread softened with water, dried fruits, and herbs steeped into warm tea, they spoke softly about the future, about what might grow in the gardens, about how deep the well might become, about whether this place might become something greater than a camp, a settlement, perhaps one day even a village. Children lay beside fires, tracing pictures in the sand with sticks. Some drew waves of water, others sketched small houses. A few drew lines radiating from a central point, the spring. When night returned, stars spread themselves again across the sky with effortless brilliance. They watched as the fires burned low, as the gardens cooled with the night, and as the well glimmered faintly in the soft lantern light. The settlement was no longer just a cluster of tents beside a spring. It was beginning to take root. And through the quiet rhythms of digging, planting, and tending, the tribe began learning what it meant not just to survive the desert, but to live with it. Dawn returned to the oasis with a quiet, golden softness, spilling over the dunes like warm breath on cool glass. It illuminated the basin slowly, touching first the tips of the tents, then the edges of reed baskets drying near the spring, and finally the faces of those who were waking to begin another day. No one rushed. No one hurried. The settlement, though small, had already developed its own rhythm, one that unfolded like a gentle ripple across still water. For the first time since their arrival, the tribe prepared something that resembled a market. It began with a simple idea whispered between the women the previous night. If we gather what we have, if we place our crafts together, perhaps life may feel more rooted here. The suggestion wasn't grand or planned. It was born from instinct, the human desire to create spaces of sharing, to turn survival into community. And so, as the early light warmed the sand, families carried small items out of their tents, baskets woven from reeds, clay pots shaped during earlier travels, strings of dried fruits, small carvings made by restless hands during long nights. Placed together, they formed humble displays on mats and low tables, like offerings laid gently before the desert. The market settled itself near the spring, where the ground was flat and shaded lightly by a cluster of hardy bushes. A soft wind drifted across the basin, stirring the edges of the tents and carrying with it the faint scent of damp reeds mixed with cool morning air. It smelled like possibility. Taran was among the first to wander through the forming market. He walked slowly, his bare feet sinking slightly into the cool sand. He carried a handful of polished stones he had collected from the rocky edges near the dunes, stones smoothed by wind and time, each holding tiny patterns of color. He placed them carefully on a woven mat, arranging them in a small circle. They were not valuable, but they held a certain beauty, one that reflected his quiet fascination with the world around him. Nearby, an older woman named Nara laid out clay cups she had shaped during the long journey. Their surfaces bore faint fingerprints, ridges from her palms pressed into the clay before firing. She touched each cup lightly, as if greeting old friends. Raffi set down a series of wooden tools, spoons, handles, and small carved pegs for tents. He had made them in moments of rest during their travels, carving the wood with quiet patience. Each item was simple, functional, made from the heart rather than for show. Little by little, the market grew. Not with noise or bustle, but with presence. People gathered not to bargain or trade aggressively, but to simply be among one another. They walked between the mats in slow, wandering paths, pausing to admire an object or share a few calm words. Their conversations flowed like the trickle of water from the spring, gentle, uninterrupted, carrying with it the warmth of connection. The desert, once an expanse of silence, now held the murmurs of life. As the sun climbed higher, warming the basin with a soft golden glow, a group of women placed baskets of dates and dried figs at one end of the market. The scent of the fruit sweet, earthy, touched by sunlight mingled with the smell of fresh bread baking on flat stones. The bread puffed slightly as it warmed, releasing a comforting aroma that drifted across the settlement. Even the camels, resting under stretched cloth shades, lifted their heads as if acknowledging the familiar smell of morning food. At the center of the market, Sahir sat on a low stool, his staff resting across his knees. He watched everything unfolding with a peaceful expression, eyes filled with a mixture of reflection and quiet pride. The market was simple, yet to him it felt monumental, an early sign that this place was becoming something more than a temporary stop. He picked up a clay pot, rolling it gently between his palms. Its surface felt warm from the sun, textured with faint grooves. Sahir smiled softly, thinking of how human hands leave traces on everything they create, echoes that linger long after the makers are gone. Across from him, two children giggled as they examined a small wooden toy shaped like a camel. Its legs were uneven, its body slightly tilted, but its charm was unmistakable. They took turns nudging it along the sand, watching it wobble and fall. Each time it tipped over, they laughed, picking it up again with the pure joy that comes only from simple things. The market's atmosphere was too calm to be called lively, yet too filled with presence to be called quiet. It was something in between, alive in the softest, most gentle sense. People moved as though in a slow dance. A woman knelt to straighten the arrangement of her reed baskets. A man paused to listen to the soft clinking of wooden beads strung on twine. A group of teenagers sat in the shade, shaping thin strips of leather into new straps, their motions rhythmic and deliberate. From time to time, the breeze shifted, carrying the sound of laughter, the smell of baking, the rustle of fabric, or the faint murmur of the spring's continuous flow. These motifs repeated throughout the morning, weaving a pattern of sensory familiarity that made the settlement feel grounded. One moment in particular stood out. A young girl, perhaps 7 or 8, sat beside her grandmother near a display of woven mats. She held strands of reed between her small fingers, mimicking the older woman's motions. The grandmother guided gently, never rushing her. Their hands moved together, slow, steady, weaving in a pattern as ancient as civilization itself. Taryn watched them from a distance, feeling a quiet warmth settle in his chest. He had never imagined the desert could hold moments like this, moments filled with gentleness, learning, and stillness. He had always known the desert as something fierce, something to endure. Yet here it felt softer, almost welcoming, like a place that could remember joy. As the morning stretched toward midday, Sahir stood and walked to the center of the market. He did not raise his voice or call attention, yet people sensed his presence and slowly turned toward him. The desert teaches people to notice subtle things, shifts in light, ripples in sand, the quiet clearing of a throat. "We have wandered for so long," Sahir began, his voice soft and even. "But here, in this small gathering, I see the beginning of something new, not just survival, but life." There was no applause, no loud response. Just silence filled with agreement. The kind of silence that holds meaning rather than emptiness. Sahir continued, "May we tend this place with patience. May we treat each object we make, each seed we plant, and each hand we take in friendship as part of the future we hope to build." His words drifted like wind across water, sinking into the hearts of those who listened. Afterward, people returned to their slow mingling, but something had subtly shifted. The market felt more rooted, more certain. It wasn't just a display of things. It was a small tapestry of community. By midday, the sun had grown hot enough that people retreated to the shade. The market remained, its items resting under cloth coverings, waiting for the cooler hours of late afternoon. But even in pause, it felt alive, like an ember glowing beneath ash. Children napped beside their mothers. Men sat near the spring, discussing plans for expanding the well. Women returned to the gardens to give the young plants a midday watering, their shadows long and narrow against the sand. Every action unfolded slowly, savoring the moment. When evening came, the market relaxed into its second life. Lamps hung from tent poles cast warm halos of golden light. The scent of evening meals, lentils simmering, flatbread warming on stones, herbs steeping, filled the air. People wandered again between mats, carrying small lanterns that flickered with the desert breeze. The market no longer felt new. It felt natural, as though it had always been meant to appear here, beside this spring, beneath these stars. And perhaps that was the quiet truth of it. Life blossoms in places where care meets patience, where people linger instead of hurry, where small rituals, setting out baskets, lighting lamps, laying mats, slowly accumulate into tradition. The market ended only when the fires burned low, and the stars emerged in their full brilliance, scattered across the sky like grains of silver sand. The settlement slept soundly that night, the warm hum of community lingering in the air. And the desert, silent and ancient, held their small flicker of life with gentle curiosity. The morning air carried a weight that was both gentle and resolute. After the first distant travelers had passed, leaving their traces of spice, sound, and soft conversations behind, the settlement seemed to breathe differently. Tents that had long swayed in the unsteady rhythms of the desert were now joined by the deliberate work of stone. The villagers, guided by Sahir and the elders, had decided the oasis would no longer be a temporary refuge. It would endure. They would build a kingdom in the sand. The first stones arrived slowly, brought on camelback from distant quarries that glinted pale in the early sun. Each block was heavy, rough-hewn, and cold to the touch. Taryn followed the workers along the dusty path, his small hands brushing against the uneven surfaces of rock. The chill of each stone contrasted sharply with the warmth of the sun-soaked sand beneath his bare feet. He marveled at how permanence could feel so deliberate, so tactile. Every stone seemed to whisper a story of endurance, a promise that this place, once fragile and ephemeral, might now resist the desert's constant movement. Elders traced diagrams in the sand, fingers cutting furrows and curves that mirrored the vision of a city yet to exist. These were not rushed sketches, but careful, measured lines, each telling a story. Where the central plaza might sit, how water channels could run beneath streets, and where dwellings would rise to catch evening breezes while shielding inhabitants from relentless sun. The sound of fingers dragging through sand was almost musical, a delicate clink accompanying the soft scrape of stone chisels against granite and limestone. Taryn listened to the rhythm, the occasional crack of a stone splitting, the muted thud as a block was lowered into place, and the echo of voices exchanging instructions with patience rather than haste. Men and women labored side by side, their bodies learning the slow geometry of building. They lifted, adjusted, and set stones with deliberate care, hands roughened and powdered with dust, palms coated in a fine layer that glimmered faintly in the sun. Sweat ran down their faces, but it moved in harmony with the day's heat, not against it. Each block added a small permanence, a hint that the village's existence could stretch beyond survival and into the shape of something enduring. The desert watched silently. Dunes shifted faintly in the distance, wind whispering over their curves, as if observing the unfolding labor. Even the spring seemed to pulse in rhythm with the work, water trickling with a measured patience that mirrored the villagers' own. Birds, once scattered and wary, perched nearer on the rocky outcrops, curious witnesses to this slow transformation. Their soft calls punctuated the day, gentle notes against the deep echo of stone being shaped. Children became small apprentices to the adults' work. Taran, for instance, carried pebbles and helped clear sand from the edges of trenches. He marveled at the echo a dropped stone made against a hollow space, and the way sunlight refracted on the pale surfaces of quarried rock. Even in these tiny acts, he felt the weight of permanence pressing gently against the air. The village was learning to exist not just as people surviving the desert, but as a people shaping it to host something larger, something lasting. Inside the central area, a circle of elders gathered around a partially built platform. Their hands, veined and strong from decades of labor, traced lines in the sand, measuring, adjusting, reconsidering. Each gesture was deliberate, every instruction measured and slow. Sahir, standing among them, felt the magnitude of what was unfolding. They were laying not just stone, but intention itself. Every corner, every foundation, was an act of commitment, a declaration that their home would not vanish with the next storm, or with a few passing seasons of drought. The tools clinked in harmony, hammers tapping chisels, wooden mallets shaping edges, and the occasional grinding of stone against stone. Dust hung in the air, glittering faintly, moving lazily with the wind that whispered from dune to oasis. The scent of earth, mingled with the faint tang of sweat and the crisp aroma of stone, filled the senses. It was a smell of permanence, of labor that reached beyond immediate need into the realm of aspiration. At times the elders would pause, letting the younger builders settle stones in place, and trace their fingers through the cool surfaces, feeling the temperature, the weight, the texture. "It will hold," one whispered, more to himself than anyone else, as if speaking aloud might anchor the promise of stone. The desert listened, wind carrying faint echoes across the basin, dusk glinting like small stars on the horizon. As afternoon stretched, shade became precious. Canvas awnings were raised to protect the workers from the sun's full glare, their edges fluttering gently in the desert breeze. Craftsmen rested in the intermittent cool, wiping dust from their hands and faces, but their minds never stopped measuring, planning, imagining. Each block of stone, each measured line in the sand, was a quiet act of faith. Even camels, who had long been companions in journeys of survival, paused nearby, watching the labor with gentle curiosity. By evening, a rough outline of the kingdom had emerged. Foundations crisscrossed the sand like veins, channels cut to guide water subtly through streets, and small dwellings began to take form, their bases raised just enough to catch the evening winds. Lanterns were lit along the worksite, their flickering light revealing the texture of stone, the glint of sweat, and the careful precision of hands that had worked all day. The elders lingered longer than usual, tracing paths with fingers in sand and whispering soft corrections, to ensure the structures would endure. Taran stood on the edge of the central plaza, hands pressed against the cool surface of a newly laid stone. He felt the contrast, the rock firm and permanent beneath his palms, the sand shifting quietly beneath his feet. He imagined the oasis years hence, streets filled with laughter, merchants displaying wares, poets reciting under lantern light, and water flowing with ease through channels laid with such deliberate care. It was a vision that felt as fragile as it did inevitable, yet the solidity of the stone beneath him anchored the dream. As night fell, the desert settled around them. Stars emerged like pinpricks of distant fire, illuminating the rough silhouettes of half-built walls and unfinished dwellings. A quiet pride hung in the air, subtle but pervasive. The village had begun to transcend mere survival. It was becoming a place of permanence, of intention, a kingdom taking shape not in grandeur, but in slow, deliberate acts that respected the rhythms of the land. And in the hush of night, the desert whispered again, not as a force of harsh survival, but as a patient witness. The stones, once cold and lifeless, now held warmth, warmth of effort, of hope, of beginnings that stretched beyond the horizon. In the stillness, Sahir, Taran, and the elders felt the echo of possibility, a soft promise etched into the very foundations of their home. The desert, it seemed, was allowing the dream to take root, granting patience to those willing to build not just with hands, but with vision, care, and time. The morning light poured over the settlement like liquid gold, striking the newly laid stone foundations and glinting off rough surfaces that had once been dust. Yet, amid the rising walls and the steady rhythm of labor, a new vision began to take shape, a structure unlike any the villagers had built before. It was a palace, or at least the faint outline of one, emerging from the sand as if the desert itself had lent its own patience to the endeavor. Columns rose like palm trunks sculpted in stone, thick and tapering, their surfaces etched with swirling symbols of wind and stars, marking the intersection of human ambition and natural rhythm. Craftsmen moved slowly beneath canvas awnings, each motion deliberate and considered. Their hands, coated in a fine dust of limestone and granite, traced patterns, carved curves, and shaped every surface with quiet reverence. Hammers tapped chisels in measured cadence, and the faint clink of metal against stone echoed across the courtyard, mingling with the occasional call of a bird returning to the oasis. Even the camels, accustomed to the work of survival and trade, seemed to pause at intervals, their dark eyes reflecting curiosity as though they too recognized the palace as a departure from ordinary life. The ruler-to-be, Sahir, walked through the unfinished halls, his sandals brushing over the cool surfaces of stone. Each step echoed faintly, a soft percussion against the skeletal walls, resonating with both promise and responsibility. He pressed a hand against a column, feeling the faint roughness beneath his palm, the coolness a stark contrast to the sun-warmed air outside. The palace was not yet complete. Scaffolding leaned against walls, and the outlines of rooms remained open to the sky. But already the structure carried a sense of majesty, not through size alone, but through deliberate intention, a slow unfolding of vision into reality. In shaded corners, masons traced intricate symbols into stone, stars, gusts of wind, flowing rivers, all abstract yet purposeful, capturing the rhythms of the desert and the movement of time. Each symbol was a meditation, a small story etched into permanence. Craftsmen would pause occasionally to wipe their brows, breathe deeply of the desert air, and observe the sunlight shifting across their work. Shadows lengthened and retreated with the sun's slow arc, highlighting the depth of carvings and the careful curvature of columns. Every detail was attended to, with the patience of those who understood that haste could erode not only stone, but the very essence of a dream. Women of the settlement arrived at intervals, carrying water in clay vessels to cool the hands and faces of laborers, or to sprinkle gently on the stone, allowing it to be shaped with both firmness and suppleness. Their presence was quiet but essential, a rhythm of care interwoven with creation. Even in these simple gestures, a palace was born, not merely from stone, but from a network of lives attentive to one another, each act of service and support giving rise to permanence. Children, naturally drawn to the novelty of towering walls, watched from safe distances, their small fingers tracing lines in sand that mirrored the patterns carved in stone. Taryn, especially, lingered near the columns, imagining the future halls alive with movement, the hushed footsteps of courtiers, the rhythmic sway of tapestries catching the wind and lanterns casting soft, golden light on polished floors. He imagined poets seated beneath carved alcoves, reciting verses that reflected the stars above and the winds that shaped the dunes beyond. In the unfinished palace, the future whispered in small echoes, accessible only to those willing to move slowly and pay attention. The midday sun pressed down, baking the sand and warming the stone so that its surfaces radiated gentle heat. Yet beneath canvas awnings, craftsmen continued, their muscles taut but patient, arms moving in arcs that had been perfected over hours and days. Each strike of hammer and chisel was measured, a pulse in the slow heartbeat of construction. Dust rose in soft clouds, shimmering in sunlight like faint waves on a distant sea. For Sahir, these clouds were not merely debris. They were proof of the palace's becoming, the physical manifestation of a dream wrested from wind and sand. He wandered through the central hall, the space still rough and unpolished, imagining the weight of future gatherings, council meetings, ceremonies, and feasts. He pressed his palm against the floor, feeling the cool stone beneath, and reflected on the responsibility it would carry. Every foundation laid was a declaration that the oasis was more than a home. It was a seat of power, a beacon of civilization in the vast, patient desert. And with that weight came an awareness that the palace was also a mirror of human hope, human resilience, and human patience. The late afternoon brought a gentle wind, carrying fine grains of sand that glinted like faint sparks in the sun. It drifted through unfinished corridors, weaving around columns and across smooth stone, reminding all who labored that the desert had its own voice, one that required listening. Craftsmen paused often to observe the play of light and shadow, allowing the air and the sun to guide their hands, shaping forms that would endure long after their own presence had faded. In this way, construction became collaboration with the desert itself, human ambition tempered by the rhythms of nature. As the sun dipped closer to the horizon, workers leaned against columns or rested on scattered stones, tracing their fingers along carvings, observing patterns, and absorbing the vast silence of desert evening. Sahir moved among them quietly, offering encouragement and reflection, but never haste. The palace demanded patience, and in turn taught it. Even the simple act of walking through half-built halls became a meditation. Each echo, each cooling surface beneath the hand, was a note in the symphony of creation. Evening brought lanterns and fires, flickering against unfinished walls, throwing shadows that danced and shifted like moving stars. The smell of sand-warmed stone mingled with the faint scent of herbs carried from the village. The air itself seemed to hold a hush, as though the desert and the builders shared a quiet understanding. This place was becoming, and becoming slowly was necessary. Taryn crouched near the central steps, imagining the floors polished and walls smooth, imagining the palace alive with music, conversation, and ceremony. Even in this incompletion, the promise of permanence resonated in every shadow, every carved symbol, and every column rising toward the sky. Night settled over the oasis, and the palace stood as a silhouette against the fading light. Though unfinished, it already carried presence, a rhythm in stone, a quiet authority, and a testament to human patience. The desert, once indifferent, seemed to lean in closer, observing the slow transformation. Stars scattered above reflected in the cooling surfaces of stone, and the wind whispered through the rising halls, carrying a promise of endurance, of knowledge, and of time. In these hours, Sahir and the villagers understood something essential. A kingdom is not merely the sum of walls, columns, and courtyards. It is the patient layering of human effort, attention, and imagination. Every strike of chisel, every carved symbol, every careful gesture of care and collaboration was a thread in the fabric of permanence. And in this delicate, measured way, the desert allowed a kingdom to rise, not swiftly, not with fanfare, but with slow, deliberate intention, shaped by human hands in dialogue with the patience of the sands themselves. As night deepened and lanterns flickered low, the palace exhaled the heat of the day, cooling slowly under the vast expanse of starlit sky. The desert, patient and eternal, held the structure in quiet witness, and those who had labored, from Sahir to the youngest child tracing patterns in sand, felt the faint thrill of a dream realized in its slow, deliberate becoming. In the unfinished walls and columns, the heartbeat of a kingdom could already be felt, steady, enduring, and infinitely patient. The sun rose softly over the oasis, brushing the palace's palm-like columns with warm light that flickered across polished stone floors and reflected in the gentle flow of water channels. By now, the kingdom had grown into something far larger than its humble beginnings. The tents of early settlers had been replaced by sturdy dwellings, and the streets were laid in careful, flowing lines that guided both water and travelers alike. The palace, now complete, stood as a heartbeat at the center of the settlement, a symbol of endurance, of vision, and of the patient labor that had shaped it. Merchants arrived at dawn, their camels' hooves soft against stone-paved streets. The air was fragrant with spices carried from distant lands, cinnamon, cardamom, saffron, and the faint, resinous scent of incense that had traveled across dunes and mountains. They laid out their goods with the same deliberation that the village had learned from its earliest visitors. Baskets of dried fruits, jars of honey, folded textiles dyed in deep indigos and ochres, and finely worked trinkets glimmered beneath the early light. Buyers and sellers moved slowly, carefully, exchanging goods with soft words and measured gestures, as though the desert itself demanded attentiveness and respect. The streets of the oasis were alive but never hurried. Children ran between fountains and shaded alcoves, their laughter echoing softly, mingling with the clink of pottery, the scrape of reed pens across parchment, and the occasional pluck of strings from musicians playing in open courtyards. Scholars walked alongside artisans, exchanging knowledge in hushed tones, tracing diagrams in the sand or in inked scrolls, their conversations flowing as gently as the oasis streams. Even the wind seemed to carry a new rhythm, brushing against the walls, whispering through the palm-like columns, and stirring patterns in the sand outside the city gates. Sahir, now older and bearing the calm authority of one who had shaped both stone and society, moved through the palace halls with slow steps. He felt the cool stone beneath his palm, the smoothness of polished floors underfoot, and the faint vibration of voices echoing softly through the vaulted corridors. Here, in this convergence of effort and imagination, the kingdom had reached a quiet brilliance. It was a place where survival and beauty met, where the necessity of water and the desire for art coexisted in harmony. At dusk, the palace courtyard became a sanctuary of reflection and joy. Lanterns were lit one by one, their soft glow painting walls with flickering shadows that danced like mirages. Poets gathered to recite verses beneath the stars, their voices rising and falling in rhythms that mirrored the gentle flow of the oasis streams. Citizens, merchants, and travelers alike lingered to listen, absorbing words that spoke of sand and wind, of distant horizons, of journeys begun and journeys yet to come. The fragrance of burning incense mingled with the scent of evening air, carrying faint echoes of faraway lands and timeless stories. Music filled the quiet spaces between words. The soft scrape of reed pens on parchment could be heard in nearby courtyards, as scribes recorded trade, treaties, and poems alike. A child traced letters in sand, her fingers moving with careful precision, while an elder watched, offering quiet corrections with gentle guidance. Life here was deliberate and full, each action measured but never hurried, each moment carrying the weight and joy of a world built slowly, intentionally, with care. Even the camels, once instruments of survival, had become companions in a more cultured rhythm of life. Their soft breathing and occasional low calls echoed in the plazas, blending into the ambient chorus of human activity, water trickling and wind sighing across stone. The oasis, once a temporary refuge, had become a nexus, a point where trade, thought, art, and life flowed together in gentle harmony. As night deepened, the desert beyond the city gates held its usual quiet presence, vast and unyielding. Yet the kingdom stood as a testament to human patience and vision. The walls, etched with symbols of wind and stars, caught the moonlight in pale reflection, while streets hummed with the soft rhythm of life in balance. Citizens, lying on rooftops or walking along shaded corridors, often looked to the horizon and felt both awe and gratitude. They had learned the desert's patience and mirrored it in their own lives, shaping a civilization in harmony with the land rather than in opposition to it. Taran, now taller and more thoughtful, wandered among the fountains, cupping water in his hands and letting it slip slowly back into the pool. In those ripples, he saw reflections of the kingdom at its peak, marketplaces bustling softly with commerce, children playing, scholars teaching, and poets reciting under the glow of lanterns. Each ripple echoed not only what existed, but what had been carefully built over decades: the vision, the labor, the care, and the endurance that had transformed a temporary oasis into a lasting civilization. And as the night held the oasis in its calm embrace, Sahir walked through the palace one final time that evening, pausing at the columns, feeling the coolness of stone, the smoothness of carved surfaces, the subtle vibration of life carried through the walls. He understood that all things were impermanent, that the desert would endure longer than any palace, any kingdom, or any individual. But in this moment, surrounded by the fruits of patient labor, he also understood the beauty of the endeavor itself, the creation of harmony, of culture, of memory in stone and water, words and wind. The kingdom did not reach into eternity, yet in this golden age it had captured something enduring, the slow weaving of life into stone, of dreams into reality, and of human care into the rhythm of the desert. It was a civilization that thrived not through haste or conquest, but through attention, patience, and shared purpose, a delicate balance held beneath the unyielding sky, flowing streams, and stars that had watched over the land for countless generations. And so the oasis remained, serene and luminous under the moon, reflecting the kingdom at its height. The palace, the streets, the fountains, and the people all moved with quiet grace, living in harmony with the desert, honoring both its generosity and its demands. Life flowed gently, trade continued thoughtfully, and poetry filled the night air with its soft cadence. Here, in this calm yet vibrant world, the story of the oasis found its culmination, a golden age born from patience, vision, and the inexorable rhythms of sand, wind, and water. The desert, eternal and unchanging, held the kingdom tenderly, bearing witness to its beauty, its effort, and its fleeting brilliance, as all civilizations must one day be held. And in that quiet witness, the oasis, its palace, and its people found their place, not in immortality, but in the patient memory of the earth and the enduring reflection of water beneath the endless sky.